Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Georgiosa Papandreou sin je Andreasa Papandreua i unuk Georgiosa Papandreua, bivših grčkih premijera. Bio je predsjednik vlade Grčke od 2009. do 2011. godine. Također bio je čelnik PASOK-a. Premijer je postao nakon izbijanja finansijske krize i pobjede njegove stranke na parlamentarnim izborima. Mandat mu je označila globalna ekonomska kriza, prezaduženost Grčke i njena nesposobnost vraćanja dugova. Zbog nastojanja da situaciju riješi rezovima, Papandreou je postao nepopularan, a njegov pokušaj da te mjere stavi na referendum izazvao je žestoke kritike njemačke vlade i vodstva Europske unije. Podnio je ostavku u korist vlade nacionalnog jedinstva na čelu sa Lukasom Papademosom. Georgiosa Papandreou, predsjednik socijalističke internacionale i bivši premijer Grčke, boravio je u glavnom gradu Bosne i Hercegovine kao gost Sarajevo Festa. Za Al Jazeeru govori o odnosima Grčke i Sjeverne Makedonije, širenju Europske unije, NATO savezu i rastućem utjecaju Rusije i Kine na Balkanu.
So, Mr. Papandreou, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, France stood alone recently in opposing accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania to the EU, despite the former going as far as to change its name. Was this a slap in the face for Skopje?
It was, I think, a wrong decision. It was something that was not only bad for North Macedonia, of course, particularly, because they had shown quite a bit of courage to make these changes and come both sides compromising on this issue, this difficult issue. And this was also the main issue that had become the main obstacle in their path towards the European Union. And as a matter of fact, this was also something that everyone in Europe was saying, this is opening up the doors. So I think that this was a very bad message, and it must be reversed. I feel it's also a negative message because I understand President Macron wanting to deepen the institutions of the European Union, because that is his proposal, and I agree with that. We need to make things work better in Europe, the decision-making process, the more integration and so on. But putting Albania and North Macedonia to be the blame or to be victims of for what we haven't done, I think is wrong. And I think also that we are talking now about the beginning of the negotiations, not the end of the negotiations. So I do believe that we have to work in Europe to convince the French, particularly the French government and Mr. Macron, that it is necessary to open the doors for the Western Balkans and in particular now for North Macedonia and Albania.
But have Greeks gotten over Macedonia's name change to North Macedonia, or are there still reservations towards this very important political reconciliation?
Well, I think in both our countries there have been different views and there have been splits and different approaches. But both the previous government, and we had recent elections, and this government, even though it was had taken a negative stance initially, have accepted that this agreement is here to stay. And of course there are certain parts of the agreement that need to be completed, but that would be done over time, and that this is an important stabilizing factor for the region. And I think Greece now, having dealt with this problem with North Macedonia, can play the role that it wants to play. And when I was foreign minister some years ago, 2003, we had the presidency of the European Union, and in the Thessaloniki European Council, where everyone came to the conclusion of our presidency, there was a very strong statement and decision by the European Union that yes, Western Balkans have a future in Europe. And we must begin the whole process of integrating the Western Balkans into the European Union, to the European family. And this shows that Greece traditionally has wanted to be an engine of integration of the Balkans into the European Union. So now I think with this problem having been wrested and put aside and solved, we as Greece can play a more energetic role in the European Union to push this agenda.
But despite all this, French President Emmanuel Macron still referred to Bosnia as a ticking time bomb. Is this region really dangerous to the EU?
I think not. I think there are stereotypes that we need to get over. I think that of course we've had our problems. Of course there were wars. Of course there were lots of difficulties, and we are in a transformation and a transition into countries with more rule of law, with more transparency, with more democratic societies, with protection of human rights, more open solidarity, social markets, and so on. And this takes time. But I would disagree to try to label any country as a ticking time bomb, and because I think that this area here has had many wounds, and we are trying hard, all of us, to get beyond these wounds and work together. I think we in the Balkans need to have a stronger unified voice. Sometimes, because of our histories, we have always, looked to some great powers, and we have had our protectors, although I wouldn't call them protectors. They have played with us more than we have actually had protection. And that's why we had proxy wars, and that's why we talk about Balkanizing, the Balkanization. So the more that we can show a unified voice in this region and working together as countries, as nations, as ethnicities, the more I think our voice will be powerful inside Europe, and the more we can convince them that yes, we are moving on a good path, a path of stability and a path of a European future. So I would not agree with these types of comments.
Now there is widespread thinking of Greeks and Serbs being Orthodox brothers. Are these simply political myths or a reality? And does it mean that in the case of Bosnia, that Greece will favor one nation at the expense of others?
No, Greece has never officially, there's never been an official policy of this kind of divisions. On the contrary, we have always been in favor of multi-ethnic societies, of cohesion of societies, and of supporting cooperation amongst ourselves. I think what has happened was when we had the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union, and particularly, of course, the changes and the wars in Yugoslavia, there was a lot of fear that was created, not only in Greece, but around in many parts. And people tend to, again, get to go to stereotypes and, who am I with, who am I against, I identify with these people or I identify with that person. And that was not only with Greece, others did the same. But I think that is a mythology which has no basis. We want to be close and be friends with everyone in the region, and we have lived in different periods of our history actually quite peacefully together. There have not always been animosities, even though the Balkans have this view, but there have actually been times when we lived together very, very peacefully. And I think we need to create a vision. There is when the Greek Revolution, and almost 200 years ago, 1821, took place, there was a very inspired leader called Rigas Fereos. And if you read his vision of the time, he says, we must create a Balkans, a democratic Balkans, where we can live together. Slavs and Greeks and Turks and Jews and Vlachs and and Serbs and whatever. So he has a vision of a really a vibrant and colorful and beautiful conviviality, symbiosis of all these different groups. And I think this is the vision we need to cultivate. So getting away from these stereotypes, who is my ally, who is my enemy, who is my protector, do we have the same religion or a different religion? We want to be citizens of the European Union, and I think this is what exactly the European Union stands for. Yes, different ethnicities, yes, different religions, yes, different languages, yes, some terrible histories of killings, world wars and so on. But today we say, if we protect each and everyone's dignity, we have all our equal rights, we have our freedom of movement, we have our democratic processes, and we have a social welfare system which provides for a sense of security and prospect of economic growth. That is the way we can make sure that we can live together in peace.
But despite our countries being in relative geographic proximity, would you say that relations have been at their highest? I mean, how many times have you visited, while you were Prime Minister of Greece, how many times have you visited Serbia, Bosnia, Macedonia, or Croatia? How important is this part of the Balkans for Athens?
A good question. Of course I have visited many times, and I have met, not always visited, but I've also met many times with many of the leaders. When I was Prime Minister with my North Macedonian counterpart, Mr. Gruevski then, it was not Mr. Saev. I think I met 10 times, and that was in a period of only 2 years. Of course with Edi Rama, I know him for at least the last 20, 25 years, met many, many times. But don't forget, it was like a black hole with the Cold War. We really did not have any, other than with Yugoslavia, which was of course more open, but still we did not really have that much of a relationship. So we are building these new ties, and I think there is still, of course, a tendency to look to where is the power. Okay, is Brussels the power, or is Washington the power, or is Moscow the power, or is, I don't know, Beijing the power? Yeah.
Or
okay,
Istanbul, or Ankara, or some
or Ankara, or whatever else, or some of the other players in the region. But again, I would say that that goes back to an authoritarian system. We have learned, in our clientelistic system, if you like, often that, where do we look for the power? If we have this Balkan mentality that if my neighbor does better, I have to stop him. But actually, we should, even in our mythology, our daily mythology, you have 5 goats, I have 10 goats, and you shouldn't even have 5 goats, this kind of a thing. I think we have to realize, and this is something which we are cultivating more and more, that strength is in unity, strength is in working together. And if we as a Balkan community work together, we can be of great importance. I remember during the war in Kosovo, when there was the Quint that was talking about our area, but nobody of ourselves was actually talking about our area. And we took an initiative and we got all the Balkan countries together, except of course then Milosevic, but all the other ones. We sat together and we said, okay, can we build a future together? And when we sat together and we found there were so many commonalities, we then expressed this to the Quint. We demanded a voice and a place on the table. They respected that, and our voice was heard. I will take another area of Europe, the Nordic area. It used to be Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Now, of course, with the Baltics too. They work together. They, of course, some centuries ago had their wars too, but they work together. They, therefore, have a strong voice in the European Union. promoting programs, promoting ideas, and so on. We can do the same. So I think that this is simply something we must continue to emphasize. Working together is the only way forward.
Now, NATO recently celebrated its 70th anniversary. Greece is and has been an important member state of the military alliance. Yet there are some analysts and observers who have referred to NATO as an obsolete Cold War era relic. Has this transatlantic alliance been weakened since the coming to power of US President Donald Trump?
Well, he himself has been critical of NATO. He has said that he has, of course, has changed his position, so it's sometimes difficult to follow all the different positions, but I think there is an issue of what is the identity, what is the mission of NATO after the Cold War, and this is something that we did start discussing quite openly just after the Cold War. I'm not sure if we answered the question effectively. I think that we have to see that the types of threats we are facing as humanity need much more cooperation and much less a competition in military power and in arms. We are now developing the types of technologies that are again bringing back the specter of what we might call mutually assured destruction, which was called MAD in the past, when you knew that if one country shot a nuclear missile, the other would shoot, and then we would wipe out each other and the world with it. That had stopped, but that had stopped after the Cold War, and there were treaties which had limited and decided to move towards disarmament of the nuclear weapons, or at least limitation of nuclear weapons. But now with artificial intelligence, with automation such as drones, with the cyber wars which can get into even our nuclear stations, or whoever has nuclear stations. We've seen it in Iran, we've seen it from North Korea, we've seen it in different parts of the world. Now that we have also amazingly advanced biotechnology which can create, however, pandemics which might destroy the world. The whole fight now around the 5G and so on, which, because it's going to be so pervasive into our lives, will make us very dependent on the internet for our lives, for our daily lives. So these issues cannot be won through competition, because they will sooner or later bring us to a brink of war and escalation, and in such a few seconds, because of the quickness of communications and artificial intelligence, that we as human beings may not be able to control this. So what my view is that if we're talking about military alliances, these should be alliances where we should expand for a common security rather than fighting against each other.
But if we are witnessing the decline of the US as a global power and entering a phase of a bipolar world with rising China, India, Brazil, and Russia, is this necessarily a bad thing? Do you view Chinese and Russian influence in the Balkans as a bad thing? We know that China has purchased the Piraeus port.
Yes, of course, there has been
Greece is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
Is this necessarily bad?
I would say, first of all, we are moving into a multipolar world. And what I would have hoped is that after the Cold War, that America was, of course, dominant, that America worked more to create and help create the rules of the game for all of us, for a multipolar world. Because that is, I think, what is going to be of important value. We need to have common values and some common regulation and common understanding, And that means also a common system of institutions globally. We have the UN, but we have to see how this expands. We now have these so-called trade wars. Well, if the WTO needs to be reformed, it needs to be reformed, but it should not be destroyed. We need to move forward. We need to see, for example, how we deal with huge inequalities in this capitalist, global capitalist system, which is undermining our societies and creating a lot of problems and internal conflicts in our societies. These are issues we have to deal with, but we have to deal with them together. So I think there is an opportunity, and there still may be an opportunity for building a multipolar world which will also be peaceful, and not a multipolar world which will simply be great power rivalries and politics and conflicts.
Well, in the case
so in case of China, Greece has been, first of all, we have good bilateral relations. Yes, we know we have two different political systems, but my feeling is we need more engagement with each other than isolation. And I believe that the Belt and Road Initiative is, well, the Chinese came and invested in a time when Greece was in a crisis, and I've often told my counterparts in Europe, well, you come to invest too if you like. But I think it's an opportunity for Europe and China to redefine their relations for the next century, where we work together, where the Belt and Road is not simply structures to move our trade, but that we build on the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, should we not have sustainable energy, renewable energy? So the Belt and Road should be part of that. Should we not have other goals such as universal health care and education? Well, the Belt and Road should be a catalyst for this. Should we not have transparency and good governance? Well, let's work together. For example, the Belt and Road also goes through parts of Africa. Let's work together, China, Africa, Europe, on the investment in Africa to really help Africa stand on its own 2 feet. Otherwise, we will have what we have already, a population explosion, which will not remain within the confines of Africa, but will be even much more massive migration to Europe.
But is there a possibility of China luring underdeveloped and developing Balkan and African countries into an economic trap, in the sense of providing them with much needed money for infrastructural projects, and then eventually getting bits of chunks of these countries in case they aren't able to return the money?
Yes,
there were examples in Africa, in Sri Lanka.
Yes, I think that in the long term, this is not in the interest of China. Why would China want to be saddled with the debt of all these countries? Why would China want to give money to these countries and basically know that this will be inefficient, that some project will not work well? Will it be useful geopolitically? Will they be able to twist their arm? I'm not sure that that's really a goal. I think the goal is much more, okay, how do they expand their trade? How do all this productive capacity that China has today, how can they move into new markets and create new markets? So in the end, it is in China's interest, as it is in Europe's interest, to make sure that this money that is invested wisely, is invested so that these projects, whatever they might be, do help growth, do help sustainable growth, which will mean that these societies will be able to consume, or they'll be able to grow, will be able to buy other products, but also be part of a global effort for sustainable growth and not just consumption. So I see that because there's often a criticism by many in Europe that, you know, China is working with countries that may not be so transparent, and there's a lot of corruption, and that they'll just give them money and so on. Yeah, but Europe has done that also in the past, so we shouldn't hide behind you know, our righteousness. You know, a lot of companies in Africa and around the world have you know, worked with corrupt regimes and used this and lined the pockets of politicians rather than helping the people. So we should be self-critical when we want to criticize others. But yes, we should also tell the Chinese that this is where we must work together. Build the rules so their money and our money and the African money or whatever it is from international companies, if it's in Africa or in the Balkans, should be used wisely. And this should be done in a transparent way.
Right, Mr. Papandreou, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?